What a day it has been for young African and futuristic 2025. Each of these segments has offered something deeply insightful, bold, and necessary. From redefining African innovation to confronting the systems that continue to fail our people. Today we are reminded. Today has reminded us, rather, exactly why young African and futuristic exists, to reclaim Africa's tomorrow with clarity and courage. And I just want to take a moment to honor the team behind Youth Evolve, the work that happens in the background, the sleepless nights, the coordination. It's all done with a good heart, and I'm proud to take a stand beside people who are in this for the right reasons. Because let's be honest, we've seen it before. People who speak the language of impact, people that show up on platforms like this with just a curated passion, but whose motives don't even align with the mission. And when that happens, it honestly chips away at the trust we work so hard to build in the communities, in the sector, as well as in each other. But what keeps us going is the few, and the few who are real, the ones who don't show up for the cameras, but also for the quiet and glamorous work it takes to spark the change. So, as we begin this session, Justice 2.0, I want to center this conversation around honesty, action, and the type of justice that lives beyond theory. This isn't your usual justice conversation. Today, we are asking, what does justice look like when it's built by youth, for youth, and with the future in mind? So I would like to welcome you. Um, and now, as we also move forward in the conversation, I'm also honored to introduce two incredible voices that are already doing the work of building justice on the ground, not just talking about it, but actually living it. With me is Dr. Mpidi, who is no stranger at Youth Evolve, and I think we've shared space before, and I can say with confidence that her work and insights are deeply rooted in integrity and action. And she's not only an academic force, but also someone who understands the realities of justice in our communities, and how law, policy, and people must work together to shift things. Dr. Mpidi, thank you for joining us again and for lending your voice to this session. And joining us also is Bata Lifi, a rising sharp voice in the justice and advocacy space. Your work speaks directly to youth realities, and I think everyone here is looking forward to hearing your perspective on how justice is being reshaped in real time, by people like you. Thank you so much to the both of you for being here. Um, we'll also start with individual insights from each of you. You will have about 5 to 7 minutes to share your thoughts and set the tone for what Justice 2.0 means to you. Dr. Mpidi, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited that we are all fighting together in this journey. So now, I'm the founder of Human Police, Policing Human, and I'm invited here today because I'm also taking part in making sure that there are youth initiative on crime research that must research based on what is it that youth really want. That's the journey that I'm embarking on. So now what's been happening is that there is a process. This process, which is dynamic and community driven, and confronts system failures through protest, innovation, and environmental stewardship and cultural expression. We've been seeing it. And now we live in the technological era. And we also have culture, which those two are crucial arenas that are demanding that we enact justice. I would like to say thank you again. And I'm here so that we can be able to discuss this and acknowledge that there are things that are not working. There are systems that are failing, and we'll talk about it in this session. Thank you so much.
Over to you.
All right. I think it's over to me now. Can you hear me, Pablo?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Batlalifin Khotwe. I'm a PhD candidate at Global Change Institute, which is an entity that falls under the Faculty of Science at WITS. My work looks at African food systems and imagining what food systems of the future on the continent kind of looks at. And a lot of this, if you can just move to the next slide. Thank you. A lot of this stems from some of the sort of food narratives, poverty narratives that have often stemmed from the continent. Although many of these are true, it's very important for us to kind of really imagine and rethink some of the ways in which narratives about our continent stem from. And in so opening and kind of my call to action to you guys and everyone who's watching, I invite you to indulge on this very popular quote by Thomas Sankara when he says that he who feeds you controls you. And this has actually been a recurring theme in some of the earlier talks, some of which spoke on GBV and the use of technology as well. So it's important for us to think about how power kind of manifests, particularly on the African continent, through food and food systems discourse. So if you think about it, for as early as many of us have kind of some childhood memory, our continent has always been known as this place of, disparity, of hunger, of war. And in so doing, my work speaks to say, but there's a way in which we can reimagine and rethink some of these existing narratives, many of which are true, but that is not fundamentally the African story. I believe that the African story is that of the future, is that of prosperity, is that of sustainability and justice. Can we just move to the next slide? So to kind of set the tone based off what Thomas Sankara speaks of with regards to who feeds you, is to just a brief synopsis of kind of the stats or data that speaks to the context of where Africa is today, especially with our food systems. So there's growing hunger levels on the continent, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where we have close to, at the moment, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations reports that close to 860 million people experience food security or food insecurity of some sort, and to some extent push that those who experience acute numbers of this, stemming around 250 to 300 million people within sub-Saharan Africa, experience what we therefore term as acute food insecurity. And many of you are possibly familiar with pictures like this, where there's kind of been some drought that has impacted a rural community, and there's just this sort of call to action that requires this Western and Eurocentric intervention to come in and save us. And in many regards, the face of these sort of narratives of poverty and of struggle tend to be that of either African women or young people themselves. So, and in this as well, we see increasingly our food systems being very vulnerable to system shocks. Instances of this is thinking around just more recently, the COVID-19 global pandemic, and how it kind of just shuts down global value chains and increased overnight the cost of food. And also just creating increased experiences and prevalences of hunger on the continent as well. Added to this as well is the fact that with these system shocks, is we live in an era or in an epoch where there's increasing climate change or climate related issues, and in so doing, apologies for that. In so doing, we find our food systems kind of very vulnerable to these, whether it's droughts or excessive floods, as in the case of here in Southern Africa, particularly in the Eastern Cape, South Africa, who's just recently experienced floods killing 89 people this afternoon. We've also continued to see increased levels of inequality with those who have access to resources, particularly addressing issues of inequality. We're also seeing, as I've already mentioned, increasing costs of living. And I think just to kind of close this segment of it is to kind of touch briefly on the unsustainable nature or the manner in which our food system is kind of natural resource intensive. So a lot of it is really based on putting in a lot of chemicals and so forth, and that is not necessarily speaking to the context or the kind of cultures that you find here. So I think I'll briefly touch on these on the next one. Can you have the next slide, please? So in thinking about these problems, I then invite you, and in some of the work that I've done here in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and in South Africa, and the provinces of the Northwest and the Eastern Cape, to indulge some of the pre-existing knowledge systems that exist in this part of the world. It's to say that although I'm highlighting these three countries, a lot of these qualities are kind of prevalent in many countries across 54 countries on the continent. And these very three important themes that my work speaks to in reflecting about, youth questions and food security on the continent speaks to sustainability, speaks to justice, and it also speaks to collaboration. Can we have the next slide, please? So with sustainability on the continent, we know for sure that when you look at the kind of developmental trajectories taking place now, a lot of these do not necessarily speak to ecological stewardship. A lot of these do not even speak to the problems that I just highlighted now. Much of what our food system mechanisms is geared at is in producing food at scale, in volume, and not necessarily as a response to really important questions of hunger, of having access to food. And in thinking around sustainability, particularly with African food systems, three very important themes come up here. It's the use and employment of indigenous and traditional systems within the ways in which we produce food. So it's very important for us to kind of go back, take a few steps back to think about the ways in which we used to produce food here, say 200-300 years ago, and really try and tap into some of those rich cultures of producing, because it is when you tap into these that you are led to these very two following points of indigenous foods, speaking mainly to vegetables, grains, and so forth, but also to the kind of livestock breeds that we have. So when you take into consideration some of these indigenous practices, you realize that the consumption of particular grains that we've consumed historically on the continent and the kind of livestock breeds that we have, whether it's here in Maasai land, whether it's through the Fulani cattle headers of West Africa, or it's even the Nguni cattle breeds that you find in Southern Africa, African people indigenous to these regions have always been intentional about having breeds and grains that speak to the context within which they find themselves in. So Southern Africa is a growingly dry region of the world, and grains like sorghum are very, resilient to rainfall patterns that are unpredictable and are also drought resistant. So when you find our grandparents and great-grandparents having consumed this, it was just not out of necessity. It was through intentional intergenerational transfer of knowledges and practices that spoke to that. They knew very well that if you consume these kind of foods or practice these kind of practices within these particular contexts, you're very much capable of resisting, climate related issues or notions or problems in that regard. Can we please move to the next slide? And the second point of thinking that I want to perhaps engage you on after sustainability is thinking about a justice-led agricultural system. How do we move away from that picture, the tainted narrative of Africa being this place of poverty, this place of lack, and so forth? It's by increasing ironically, as we would be in the session, youth participation. I think it's very important for us to see increased representation of very young people, because at the end of the day, we are the youngest continent in the world today. So most of our continent is young. I think between 60 to 70% of Africans are below the age of 27 at most. So it's very important for us to have that inclusion criteria in some of our institutions, our systems, and our processes. And one way of doing this is kind of increased democratization in our markets through increased access to resources such as land, such as capital, such as funding, such as mechanisms of employment, and also mentoring, because a lot of our young people are there and eager and ready to really tackle some of the issues that they're facing on the continent. And noting as well that we are possibly the most one of the least urbanized continents. So many of our continent's inhabitants, especially those young people, are also rural dwellers. So these are people who live in contexts that already have some of these mechanisms particularly in place, but readily available for them, to kind of take them on. It's also important for us to really rethink some of these processes or systems that I've mentioned that speak mainly to a Western Eurocentric driven agenda of development, of institutionalization, of individuality. It's very important for us to tap into some of those existing cultures and epistemologies of Ubuntu, for instance, that speak to the collective as opposed to the individual. And this allows us to build social capital and also capacitates us with resources of resilience. Resilience how? In times of droughts, because of the communal nature of our cultures across the continent, we are therefore capable and able to resist some of the crisis that we might find. So it's therefore that I will invite you through this justice-led agricultural system to maybe engage, some of our communal repositories, archives. It's in the building of granaries and communal rangelands that we often see in our rural areas and areas outside of our urban and metropolitan spaces. Can we have the next slide? So the third leg of what I would then think about in terms of the reimagining of what an African food system would look like is very important. It's collaboration. And collaboration in this regard means going beyond just your region and your country's national borders. It means tapping into other youth capacities and presence in other countries to see in and share in insights, because oftentimes some of my mentors often remind me that I'm not the first person to face some of the issues that I'm facing, and it's in this regard to say that it might not necessarily be my elders that have faced some of these issues. It might be my peers just across the border or in another corner of the continent, and technology plays this very important role in allowing us to kind of build those very important and strong networks of building capacity and sharing resources, knowledge, and insights. It's also very important for us to really think about ethics, especially in collaboration. As I've already said, that oftentimes when crisis strikes here, the first forms of intervention beyond state is often, funding that comes from somewhere in Europe or the West that tends to have, as we're seeing in the current era, tends to have health and socio-economic implications for you and me, for the very people at the grassroots. So it's important for us to really rethink some of the mechanisms that speak to how we collaborate, not just amongst ourselves, but with those that come in, often well-intended from outside the continent. It's also important for us to really think about collaboration through curriculum and education-based programs, allowing some of our school-going peers across graded schools and even in tertiary to really engage those mechanisms of collaboration and getting what it can be in other parts of the world or the continent. I've already mentioned the important role of youth in participation in these, so I'll just briefly skip over that. But it's also important, and this is something I will really highlight as kind of the breadth of my work, to tap into pre-existing resources. And often when you say resources, as a food scholar, a researcher, an activist on the continent, people are often thinking of infrastructure that often is lacking. But a lot of us have our grandparents, a lot of us have our elders in our communities, a lot of us have people who are knowledge carriers within and within us. And it's having these access to these people that perhaps we can use that as a point of departure, as a point of starting to build from, because this allows us to have those conversations about the very practices, knowledge bases that I just touched on, and often cases, taking advantage of already available technological tools. We can have that. You can have podcasts on conversations with your elders about seeds, traditional land practices, and so forth. Next slide, please. So with that, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone that I'm unintentionally othering at this particular point in time, please excuse me. I will leave you with this reminder by Africa Ikalafe when she borrows from African traditional epistemologies that we do not inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our descendants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Talifi. We said you have five to 7 minutes, but clearly you said let me make it a buffet. But nonetheless, we are grateful because what you've shared is very powerful and urgent. And the conversation around food systems as a justice issue, I feel like it's often sidelined, but you've raised about what you've raised, about rethinking food access, curriculum collaboration, and building a food literate generation is something that touches every home, every school, and every future. Let's move on to Dr. Mpidi with a presentation.
Yes, so thank you so much. I would like to add more to what the previous speaker has just indicated. And it's true, everything that he is mentioning, it is linked to systems. There are several systems entrenched, and these systems have failed African communities, particularly from a perspective of youth. The systems that I'm talking about, they are government, governance and accountability, judicial systems, corruption and political interference, and resource constraints. So everything that he was mentioning, it's linked to the systems which are related to the government, how they are doing things, accountability, judicial system, corruption, and political interference, and resources constraints. We may move on to the next slide. So I'm saying that, in addition to what the previous speaker said, it's true, these systems has failed. When it comes to the governance and accountability, many governments have not provided responsible leadership or a transparent governance, and this has led to widespread mistrust amongst young people. The system barriers include lack of access to quality education, high unemployment, persistent poverty cycles, which some of them can be addressed by the methodologies mentioned by the previous speaker. So now let's move to the systems of judicial systems. When we talk about the judicial systems, we're talking about where there should be access to justice, which remains elusive for many Africans. Common issues include long delays, high legal costs, corruption, complex legal procedures, and lack of legal counsel. And these problems are especially pronounced in less democratic or post-conflict countries. Even all the best performing nations have significant gaps in providing justice for all. You see now, when we were growing up, we had this lifestyle. I'll refer to the previous speaker. Everything that you were showing, the grains, each and every household, they will give you your own stand from the chief. When you get your own stand, you also get another land which you are supposed to grow crops and everything. So you were growing crops like beans and everything and grains on mostly most of what the previous speaker has said. Right now, all the people who were given such lands, like our elders, because some of them they've passed away, that land, because we as the youth, we were not utilizing them as much as they were, because we were running into the educational sector, other qualifications and everything. So now a lot of people have moved away from agriculture. Now the traditional leadership, some of the traditional leadership has went back and realized that, oh, that land is empty now, so let's try to do something about it. And that land is gone now. You find that they give the stand to other people as the population grows. So now the resources now, they become constrained. The legal systems are often underfunded, with the inadequate and infrastructure and shortages of trained professionals. But when we were living our lives in the old ways, they said, go get education, go get everything. Now we in South Africa and in other African countries, we have a lot of educated people who are now what? Unemployed. We've got a lot of unemployed graduates in all the continents, in all the countries within the continent of Africa. So this leads to a backlog of inefficiencies, pushing people towards informal justice mechanism that may not align with the human rights standards. It's like now things are no longer as easy as it was promised, because now everybody is educated. Okay, we're educated, and then what? It's like now we have left the old ways, the agricultural ways, where people will farm and make money. People will never be, we will never have problems of hunger and so forth. I'm just mentioning this related to the fact that I was born in the apartheid era, so I was fortunate enough to be able to witness the old ways life before the millennium and now. So now, however, right now we've noticed that youth is changing. They are building justice from ground up. African youth are redefending and rebuilding justice through diverse grassroots approach. There's activism, we see it, we see the feast must fall, we see the protest, and we see community organizing and transitional justice. As you can see on TV, there is not even a single court case that there are no people protesting outside demanding justice. We also see political innovation, we see environmental advocacy. However, with the political innovation, yes, people do vote, but when people get to parliament, they forget the message from the people. So now youth has not sat down, they are protesting. Young people have led some mass protests demanding political change and accountability. We're still doing it. Notable examples are including the Arab Spring, Sudan, Zimbabwe, and even in South Africa. These movements are often begin with immediate issues such as fuel hikes, food prices, and evoke into a broader calls for justice and systematic reforms. We also see community organizing and transitional justice. There are initiatives like African Youth Transitional Justice Academy to empower young people. We also see youth evolve. That's what we're doing now. We also see that you guys are trying to address issues in memory, truth, and reconciliation. Youth are now being trained in advocacy, documentation, and community dialogue. That's what we're doing right now, talking about what we're experiencing, that, okay, things were like this. Now we're getting hungry, we're unemployed, we're highly educated, we've got the technology. But what's really happening? Why does the chaos keep on continuing? So now they are implementing local pilots projects to address justice in the specific context, just like Youth Evolve we're doing now. Many young Africans are bypassing traditional politics. They are forming startups, engaging in digital activism. As you can see, now we're living in the age of AI, and we're not ignoring it. We understand what's happening, and we're also creating citizen groups. So the use of social media in a form of art, such as some of its rap, graffiti, or new movies and everything, and updated cultural codes to challenge authority and promote less patriarchal or hierarchical, more inclusive societies, so that there's equality. We also see that we have a problem of environmental advocacy. We are aware that there is climate change. We can see the winter, how it's no longer the same winter that we were used to. African young people are increasingly involved in environmental justice. They do that. They participate in global and local campaigns. They are influencing policy, changing climate change and ecosystem restorations. They understand this. We also know the initiatives like Guardians for Earth, who pairs young people with experienced mentors to foster engagement in global with global discourse. So we understand that, because now we live in the world of AI. There must be an intersection within the tech and the culture, with justice and digital activism. So now social media platforms right now, they are serving as powerful tools for African youth. We are well informed. We see all these videos from each and every social media platform. So the digital campaigns and the online communities have become the central advocacy, because it's right here in our hands. So it's easy for me to see what's happening in other African countries. This includes campaigns for gender equality, environmental rights, and political reforms as well. So now technology, it is being used and being leveraged to improve access to justice, particularly for vulnerable groups like children. However, we have a problem that technology is also exploiting children. You can see, maybe let's say in South Africa, there's been a new legislation for cyber, just to address matters like this. However, challenges do persist even with the digital age and the resistance from the traditional transformation. And people are exploiting this instead of utilizing it for securing our future. So youth are utilizing music, art, and traditional cultural codes for the contemporary realities. They are promoting justice and challenging oppressive systems. This culture of activism functions not only in a form of resistance, but it also means to build a new us, because we understand that things are changing. Now, in conclusion, I would like to say that justice, as redefined by African youth, transcend traditional legal systems and formal advocacy. It is a dynamic, community-driven process that directly confronts system failures. And we cannot say things are right. No, there are system failures. We've seen it. So technology and culture are not merely just tools. They are essential arenas where justice is reimagined, demanded from the ground up. Right now, in Human Police Policing Human, we have formulated a youth initiative on crime research survey, which is focusing on what is really distorting the future of South African youth, to understand the threats that are facing. So it's divided into 4 themes. We're focusing on youth and gender-based violence, AI and digital crime, psychoactive drugs, and also school aligned crime. So the youth are responsible for identifying the questions that they would like to ask the youth of South Africa. What is it that bothers them? And then from there, we're busy collecting data based on the questions. And those questions, they will be able to generate reports so that we understand what youth wants in this social dynamic and all these problems that we're facing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mpidi, for your insights. Very, very insightful. And I mean, both of you, you touched on something that hit hard, like I mentioned, how food systems are not just agricultural, they are also political, cultural, and deeply personal, from
Yes.
indigenous knowledge to what Butlalifi touched on, school curricula, and you framed food justice as a birthright, and also Dr. Mpidi in your presentation, was just, it was layered in um, very much insightful things. From from the systems that fail youth, to corruption, to the gaps in the judicial systems, also environmental, and ever-growing influence of technology. You both gave us a panoramic view of the struggle for justice. And then, I'll just open up the platform to both of you, with the issues of systems that you raised. With Batalifi, it was food in excess. With Dr. Mpidi, it's more in governance, and the land. In a continent where land is politicized, and resources are unequal, which is an injustice that in itself. The youth are really often excluded. And I would really just ask, what does reclaiming that power actually look like? Is it through curriculum? Is it through community governance, or legal reform? And how do we then ensure that it's not just the rural farm being centered, but also the urban youth that is disconnected from the soil, but is still hungry for justice?
I think one way in which we can perhaps begin with this is to, I think as young people, it's important for us to perhaps look at some of the movements and movements that are often within and around us. So whether you're in a rural area or you're in urban settings, there's always some community-led initiatives that speaks to food or land or even socioeconomic issues of the area. So it's important for us to maybe perhaps tap into some of those and engage conversations there. One of my favorite movements that's kind of happening right now is the winning of the case by BioWatch in South Africa that kind of challenged a few conglomerates that wanted very much to bring into the context of South Africa genetically modified seeds. And when you look at the movement itself of BioWatch, although it's really kind of urban based, a lot of the activists that are involved in there are people, who come from rural areas who also saw the need to say that, yes, we understand that technology is there to kind of help us build resilient and resistant seeds, but some of the seeds that we already have within our communities are very important. What we perhaps need is opportunities that allow for us to not just farm with these seeds, but also have access to markets where we can trade with your local value chains, with other, entities that might be interested amongst, along the food value chain. So I think it begins with us just looking at some of the initiatives that might be within our communities and ecosystems.
Yes. Yes. So may I go ahead? So now, with relation to what the previous speaker has just mentioned, let's right now look at rural. In rural areas right now, I come from a village where there are chiefs. They always make sure that there is a call of saying, okay, you this particular family from with this surname, please bring in your papers to show that, okay, this is your home and this is your land and everything. They are trying right now to make sure that, because a lot of people whose parents have passed away, a lot of us, we ignore that particular land, small land where they used to grow farms and everything. Right now, I'm just focusing on the rural area. So now, what youth can do right now is that you must not ignore your inheritance as a rural person, because all of us from all the ages, each and everyone who comes from an old traditional village, there is a stand where your parents build a home or your grandparents build a home which has a lot of big yards, and there's also another land allocated linked to the land allocated in a farming area not far away from your home or within the proximity of your home, linked to the stand with the same number. Everyone in the local village, they know that this stand belongs to this particular family and that land belongs to this particular family, linked to the stand. It's been like that in the whole South Africa in the old ways. So now here in urban areas, we also have stands. Let's just say, obviously, all of us, we didn't fall from the tree. We have families here. Let's say you were born here in Gauteng, where there's a family, there's a house. You find that some of the parents, they pave the entire yard. You see, not even leaving a single space for planting something, food and everything. However, some of them, they do have this kind of houses where you find that there is a small land behind where you can start a backyard farming, which can be able to help you to formulate an informal trading or register in a form of spaza shop or veggie market. Because right now there is not even a single household that anyone can tell me that, oh, we don't need an onion, we don't need beans, we don't need all those things. You find that we have these big yards, we don't plant anything. Every day we go to the mass markets to go and buy food, which we can plant in our own backyards. So now planting in our own backyards in urban areas and planting in our own yards at home in rural areas, it can also generate some sort of a scenario of bringing the issue of unemployment injustice to place. So now there's a lot of technological things that will show you, okay, in such a dry area you can plant 1 2 3 4. In such a this kind of soil you can plant 1 2 3 4. So some of these things, sometimes we don't see them. So I would like to encourage everyone, if you know you come from a rural area, claim your parents' land if it's there, as a siblings as you have. If you come from an urban area, find a small corner where you can plant food to eliminate the issue, the cycle of poverty, the cycle of unemployment, and also some of the injustice which you know that the government knows we're millions of we're millions. They cannot all cater for all our problems. So I think right now we need to take care of ourselves, especially when it comes to food justice right now in this. And then you can make sure that you go through the legal route to make sure that you know this is my family land and this is our family farmland and this is my family's backyard, and then I can do this. If you are employed or you're youth but you've got a place to stay, you can do that. Even if you have a pavement, there are places where you can, there are things that they sell at hardwares where you can plant food so that you don't have to go and buy and everything. That also generates the it will also generate income. It will also generate employment because people drive their cars going far away to go buy a tomato or an apple or something that you can plant in your own yard and do that. I think that's my take on this one, or this issue, that some of the injustices, we need to follow it up. It's our right. There is some land there that already exists, and then we just forget about it. Oh, it belongs to my mother, and then what happens? And then it becomes abandoned. They take it and give it to someone else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think now we can just for a few minutes open it to the audience, and there's a comment here from Everything Pineapples, and they say there's a growing community of young people who are going vegan and some are farming, but we know in some of our communities there's no free land to farm, especially township settings in South Africa. And I think that's the question that I touched on now before both of you took the stage, to say, farming is farming, and it is known to be something that happens in rural areas and farms. And I guess now there's also that touch to say, let us bring that type of thing to township communities. And Everything Pineapples also continues to say, how can we mobilize ourselves against food and land injustice? And it is directed to you, Batlalifi.
Wow. Okay, those are very important and interesting questions brought forward. A bit tough, but I think for one, I think the thing we need to realize is this: the issues facing African youth today are issues that to some extent have been faced in other parts of the world. So one instance of this is this: when you look at demographical makeups of countries like China and Italy, although they have quite an older aging population, there's this drive towards moving people back to rural areas. That means there's actually, we're sitting on gold mines here with our rural lands, as Doc just mentioned. One. Two, we need to not take for granted the power of collective action. Spaces like this bring together people who are forward thinking, who are thinking about some of these issues in a different light. And it's this collaboration that allows us to say, 4 or 5 of us can meet in our rural or township community to approach the ward councillor, for instance, to say, we need a small plot of land. If such a land is not available, can you perhaps speak to the station commander of a local police station who can maybe just give us a small corner within the vicinity where we can come maybe once or twice a week to tend to some of those community gardens. So I think it speaks to those questions. But to change a system will not be a top-down approach. It requires us at the grassroots, dealing with these very hard questions and problems at the grassroots level, to come together and find common ground to say, how do we challenge this systematically? And I think in our little villages and townships, that's where we need to perhaps start from.
That's very good. So now that we know that the young people aren't just waiting for permission anymore, even across the continent, youth-led movements are also rising. As both of you have touched on that. Maybe also you, Dr. Mpidi, in more maybe detail, can you give us then that feel into what building that justice from the ground up looks like, in real time, in your work or in your community?
All right. Right now, in my work, building justice from ground up. Human policing human would like to find out what is it that bothers the youth most. From talking about issues from crime, community, educational, everything that is just injustice. And when we find out what is it that bothers them, then we are obligated and forced to give it to the government, so that this information, it can help, so that the government must not keep on trying to waste money in other things that are not related to youth, or asking them what is it that they want. When people are protesting, they're trying to tell you something, and it means that you must listen and do exactly that. Our elders said, yeah, all you youth, you need to go to school. Now the youth are saying, yes, we did go to school, and we have a lot of unemployed graduates. And then what? You see, now they feel deceived, like the people who came before us, or the people who are here now, they are giving us this type of direction while the world is going towards that direction. You see, it is very frustrating. That's why you see people protesting. So I feel that the youth must not keep quiet. We are not supposed to keep quiet. We are not supposed to shut up. So all these movements, it's going to make the government and the political or the powers that be must listen. That when I am saying this is a problem, because now we other people who are older, who have been here before us, they think that those problems that they have faced they were more harder and everything. They are forgetting that the world is changing. Life is no longer like it was before. We've got new problems right now. We no longer have this same old problems that we have during the colonial eras and everything. We've got brand new problems that are confronting them, and they must listen, and we move forward to the new future and not forced on being stagnant in one place. I think that's my take on that one.
And that's very true. We are really facing a new thing, problems that require new solutions. Having to say, go to school, go study, go study. Yes, go study. Yet you are sitting in a land that that's eating itself, and you are going to study something that is very unrelated to such things. And I like the fact that also, especially, what touched me is more especially about your presentation was building this into our curriculum. These days you find in university you study agriculture, and I feel like that is something that you can study maybe from primary in schools, primary up to high school, and then once you get to varsity, you've mastered it because sure it's not as easy as it sounds, but then I don't think it's something that someone needs to pay exuberant amounts of school fees, to enrich themselves with something that is readily available to them. You know, um, Maybe some of us don't even have emakaya, but then we know someone that comes from emakaya, that moved from emakaya to here, and you see, there's no balance, and yet we are still also looking for solutions that are for today. And but then maybe to also both of you, how do we then keep that energy sustainable, especially when resources are so limited, or when our own safety is also at risk. I think you both mentioned having political interferences in such lands where people have known to be murdered for their farms because they know that that farm is very rich in soil or whatever. So then how do we then keep that energy um, sustainable, in such um, limited, with such limited resources, and when our own safety is at risk?
I mean, I think the first admission is that being an active member of society, being a change maker, is not an easy path. It's one that will always have its own challenges. Whether you are part of the community of Kolobeni in the southeast coast of South Africa, where leading activists get shot down for challenging mining companies that want rights off of their coast, or you're just a young person who's really just advocating for better foods within your kasi somewhere in a township in South Africa. But this reminds me of driving past Jobetina, which is a township of Klerksdorp a few weeks ago, where I could see along the N14, or it's the N12, that there's actually the communities around have actually used the space next to the freeway to kind of bring forward planting vegetables and so forth. The same here, something I noticed just when you drive outside of Nairobi, you see a lot of these local communities and local people who've come together to kind of plant vegetables and spinach and so forth along the road. I think that's one way of kind of just bringing that collective action into action. But also, I will not take advantage. I will not take for granted the value of education. So what we're finding ourselves is, it's not that there is any invaluableness of the kind of education we have. I think what we have is a system disjuncture where the system does not have capacity to take in the kind of skill sets that many of us often have as graduates, but the onus is on us to tap into those cosmologies. Like a lot of us, grow up in families where our mothers, our grandmothers were part of Istokfele. There is social capital When you come together as young unemployed graduates to say, we have these skills, we have critical thinking capacities, how do we bring these degrees that are deemed useless together to come up with a response to our communal and individual issues? I think there's something there that one can work with.
Great. And I think, the next one, I think this one really needs, and I'll encourage your full honesty. I don't need no fluff reflection, because it touches on my opening remarks, and it is a very bold one. And it is, how do we then hold our own accountable? I'm talking about youth who show up in spaces like this, preaching and talking justice, let's do this, let's do that, but with no real commitment. Then what does integrity look like in youth leadership today?
Okay. On that one, I feel that it starts with oneself. As a person, let's say as a young person, I must know my identity. Who am I? Where do I come from? What have I observed in this world that I'm in? What do I foresee? Let's say starting from home, what is it that I see? And then from community, what is it that I see? To my district, my province, and my national, what is it that I see? And what I observe, how does it makes me feel as a person? Remember, we are not allowed to lose ourselves in the crowd as people. Each and every one of us, hence our fingerprint, there's no one with the same fingerprint as mine, meaning that you are special. And then, meaning when you are special, whatever idea that you have in here, there's a high chance that someone else is not thinking about it. So, as individuals, when we have observed what we have observed in this world, we need to take it upon ourselves to have discipline, to ask ourselves, what is it that I want for me? You understand? So that's why you see other people protesting, because they say, oh no, I don't want this. This is not what, and then the protest starts from there, because they've identified, this is not what I want. This is not on. This is not fair. You understand? So you have to have a self-identity. Isn't it that we live in the world where I follow you, I follow you, I follow that one, I follow other one, and people lose their identity. Or who am I? And then you start, I want to start dressing like that one because, and I follow that one, and then they start losing themselves and they forget, and they become they bury themselves in other people's worlds rather than their own. So I don't think all is lost. So Youth Evolve is here. You are forcing everyone to remember, to remember their identity, to remember our identity. Batalif is here. He's saying, hey, we are getting hungry. We're going to get hungry. Climate change is here. Things are going to get better. What are you doing about it? You see? So now, when it comes to something that the previous speaker has just mentioned, he mentioned that, yeah, we have all these degrees and everything. The reason why human police policing human was started, it was started immediately after I had my master's degree. I was getting all this kind of jobs that are not related to my job. Then I said, okay. And I felt so lost. Then I said, what do I do? So this company is based on the curriculum from the school, from everything that I have learned. So I started what? Private tutoring, making small money so that I can edit what? To my salary. So every time when I edit everything that you see that I edit on the company, it is based on everything that I keep on learning, trying to make sure that I take what I've learned and try to, trying to make sure that it gives me something. If you are good in maths, someone else is not. Yeah, you can give me 10 rand. I'll teach you that. And then they give you, yeah, you can give me 50 rand. What, you want me to show you this and that? You see, It's a business. It starts. And then they say, go to Pabalo. Pabalo will help you. You see, even in universities, you know, there are people who do societies. There are, and you know, like for example, in a lot of rural areas, there are a lot of women who do society where they say, this is society, it's fine. There's society for the chickens, there's society for the groceries, and there's society for the toiletries, and there's also society for Stockfell. I mean, when I say society, I mean Stockfell. For building houses, you find that this month you are the one who's getting that particular chunk of money, and then they build your house, and then you are done. So, for example, like this. So even in universities, there are other young people who are like Womashonesas. Yeah, I'll give you 10 rand, but when you bring it back, it must be 15 rand. You understand what I'm saying? So it's there. It's there. We're doing it. So that's how. And then sometimes the main issue that I've noticed is fear, because I had it. So fear. Oh no, I can't approach. I can't approach. Like even this issue that we're talking about, the land. You need to sit down with your grandmother and say, actually, where do you come from, grandma and grandpa? So what are the papers? Where are the old pictures? Other people burn the pictures. So those things are real life evidence to show, even if it's old and then it's cracked up a little bit, but it's real life evidence that this is where your grandmother comes from. This is her land. They've been here for this long. And that is a legitimate, those are some of them are legitimate documents to show that these people lived here. You can use that to start claiming your old land if maybe you were an orphan. You know, such cases, they do exist. Things like that. So leverage each and every problem that you see around you and make a business out of it. That's my take.
That's very true. I think we need to also start having stockfiles for title deeds. I think that would be a very interesting stockfile. I'm not sure if Khalif, you wanted to add something, but I see Supogazitau on YouTube also is asking. Maybe we can attend to that after your thoughts. What are some spaces or case studies where there is good practice that we can lean on, like the case of Italy or Japan?
Yeah, that's a. I don't know if you can. Yeah, that's a very interesting question there from Uspogazi. I think for one, it's important. Like we said, Doc just mentioned that, but I had also said that some of these are existing within our communities already. Stockfells. So those are systems that are kind of geared that allow us to be sort of stable in times of crisis. And I'll give an example of this. In 2021, in 2020. I happened to be collecting data for my master's, and I was working in a community around 80 kilometers north of, just 10 kilometers from the Botswana border, in the northwest province, South Africa. And it's a rural setting. The nearest town is 85 kilometers or 90 kilometers away, and it's a rural setting that's predominantly elderly women who are raising grandchildren, and most of the parents are in the urban spaces. And what I actually realized through collecting data in the space and collaborating with them is that there was a system that they had created, especially during lockdown, that they reported on, where they were able to share amongst households very valuable things like bubi, which would be flour or maize, but this was mainly around sorghum. And you realize that these social networks are very important and provide resilience within times of crisis. And I think those are some of the ways in which we can learn from this. But also borrowing from what Doc just said, it's important for us to also think about going beyond formal sector driven narratives of being employed and business and so forth. I think it's important for us as young people to say, you know what, the system is not here to support us. There's no one who's here to save us. We might as well just get our hands dirty. And by getting our hands dirty, of course, I mean getting to work. I'm not saying, doing shady business whatsoever. So we shouldn't be scared of informal sector participation, whether it's you starting by being on the side of the road and participating in that manner. I think it's important for us to really just see those points as places where we can start from, build a capital, and then see ourselves as possibly what the finance system in cases like South Africa can see us as people who can be, trustworthy and surety, and you can obtain capital to build the business or entity of your dreams.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for clarifying the the hands dirty there. And everything Pineapple says, hot tea. I know what I'm doing next when I go home. Yeah, and this also speaks to how we can also grow in communities. If we have that mindset, can you imagine how big Kasi economics can grow? How rural economics can grow. And there's another question here from Michael. Uh, he's asking, how can we tackle health inequalities and injustices in societies? And it's for both of you. This is not a panel. It's a dialogue. So let's engage in it, and you
Okay.
can add on top of that one's point. And
Okay. The health inequalities, we can start tackling them by me as a person who's unwell to be able to open my mouth and say, I'm unwell. I feel pain here. There are a lot of people in our societies who are ill, who do not want to talk, irrespective of what type of illness. Even after COVID these days, we know everything is possible. Anyone can die any minute. You understand what I'm saying? After 2020, we know that anything is possible. So it must start from us. I must start by saying, hey, today I don't think I'm well. And then when I say I'm unwell, I must tell someone. And when I tell someone, I must expect that I should be able to at least get some answers. I'm not talking about going to the doctor yet. You see, you find that there are a lot of technology also give us a lot of information about home remedies, indigenous things that are around the yard, plants, and everything. It must start from talking from talking to someone within the families, and then if you know that you cannot do that, and you must also you must not be afraid to ask for help, that please, I would like you to take me to the hospital, or borrow me money to the hospital, or not be afraid to go there to that public hospital, even though you know that it's going to take long and everything. But I think a lot of what I've noticed is that a lot of people with health inequalities, people don't talk, and then the illness deteriorates, and then some of our people, they die, and then you realize later, oh no, this person was ill because they had 1 2 3 4, and I saw it on a documentary that, oh, this thing was preventable, so I could have taken alu and give it to this person, antibiotic, whatever, and then they drink, and then they would have been better. I'm just citing an example when it comes to medical issues, because now, when I grew up, where I grew up, there was clinics, but right now that those clinics, they don't have medicine, including Panado. But I don't remember seeing society protesting that I go to that hospital and then there's no medicine, there's no. In many cases, people just give up. You see, and it's not right. We mustn't give up. Health is a right. I think that's my take on that one.
Um, yeah, thanks, Doc, for that. I think my take from this will just be responding from maybe the work that I do. I think it's important for us to realize, like I said in my presentation, that African people were very intentional about the kind of foods that they would consume. And it's important for us to maybe have those conversations. Why is it that our grandmothers and our grandfathers would live until the ages of late 80s and the early 90s? Some even grow over
Yes,
the age of 100.
yes,
And then
yes,
at our generation and the ways, the foods that we're consuming. So it's very important for us to really engage it from there. I think it's
yes,
important to say
yes,
some of the foods that we're thinking, and in
yes,
our in our collective actions to bring
yes,
across
yes,
change as
yes,
people,
yes,
it shouldn't just be geared at creating opportunities just for ourselves. We need to
yes,
realize that, and this is why I love food so much. I love food so much. I studied it for the past few years. It's to say, food also has health implications, right? We are not speaking now about genetically modified uh, foods because it's great because we're producing at volume and scale. But when cancers, all types of cancers and your comorbid disorders start challenging our generation in the next 30, 40 years, it then becomes a conversation that we have a bit too late. So it's important for us to maybe perhaps start engaging those conversations now. And that's how I think my notion of addressing health injustices would be.
Yeah, that's very true because in countries like China also, you see people living up until 100,
Yeah.
and but now in our society it's very rare to find someone that is 100. Now we refer them to people that are living in borrowed times because of any time is tea time,
To the
and
big
but
man.
yeah, I can pick Meg, and I want to touch on that also. There's also a rising wave of um, technological food innovation. From GMOs to 3D printing meat. And they now call it nutrient capsules. Many of which are now being, given to African countries as tests, and I think that is one reason that we can say we are no longer living to until 100 and stuff. Um, and they often are given under the banner of food security, but it also raises a big justice question, uh, which is, are we really solving hunger, or are we just shifting power from local farmers to labs and those big corporations? And what happens when technology then now becomes the gatekeeper to what we eat and trade, especially on a continent so rich in indigenous farming knowledge? Batal, if you touched on Big Mac and all of that, most of them are actually artificial foods that have been injected. A chicken that grows within a week, uh, you know, and maybe you as a food souvenir, like you called yourself. How do we engage this innovation without losing our agricultural root? And maybe to Dr. Mpidi, also to you, what kind of legal and governance frameworks do we need in place so that these tech-driven solutions don't just create new forms of dependency or exploitation, under the gaze of progress? I think our food souvenir can give us his perspective first, and then we'll move to Dr. Mpide.
Yeah, that's an interesting title you've given me there, Pablo. I think it's important, number one, to technology is a very important thing. Technology, like every other innovation, like every other thing, too much of something tends to be bad, right? So it's important for us to really perhaps think about how we can use technology. Especially in my work, I think of it as leveraging technology to kind of look at the ways in which our climate is changing, right? But in the context of our continent, I don't really think there's a need to be so tech driven in terms of the interventions that we need to curb out things like food insecurity. What we actually need to do is what you just mentioned now, that we need to really decenter this institutionalization of everything and centralizing, crisis often presents opportunities for conglomerates to come in and make profits from that. So by decentering and actually kind of going more local, which is something that's ironically happening in Europe and in the West. There's this narrative of you need to know your local food producer, you need to have a conversation every now and then with your baker. Those are the things that have always existed amongst ourselves. So if you are a known local farmer and you produce milk, and Doc here is someone who produces, say potatoes, and I'm here to produce sorghum. Those are the networks that we need to perhaps tap into, and tapping into them ethically. And that's a very important thing. And I think maybe Doc will perhaps touch on that. So it's important for us to decenter conglomerates, decenter these solutions, and realize that the solutions to our problems lie in a system that is not conglomerate centered. There isn't a Bill Gates that's going to present a one solution for all problems. The solutions are here with ourselves.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Dr. Mpidi?
Yeah, it must start with the legislation. The constitution articulates properly that you are not supposed to, people are supposed to be protected from such things. So now, and you are reminding me, in the early January, there is a study that I've done as a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of Technology. The study is still out for review. It's policing public health. It's about examining the role of law enforcement in preventing food contamination and protecting the rights of health and food security in Southern Africa informal markets. You see now, we're talking about where we had a lot of challenges where we were getting a lot of deaths from food poisoning, from listeriosis, what study dating back. People have not noticed that a lot of people are dying as a result of such things. So now, so that study is still underway anyway. So now, as I'm looking at it now, immediately the previous speaker mentioned, oh, it just touched my heart and said, oh, so at least it means that I was not the only one who was being bothered about this issue. That actually, my point is in this study is that even police officials, they need to be able to be equipped with things that are supposed to to detect food that is not aligned with our health. And then now, why? Because I believe that if they do that, they will be preventing murder, culpable homicide, gross negligence due to food contamination in informal markets or anywhere else. I think you've seen it on television. How many cases were there of kids eating things from products from spaza shops and everything and so forth. You see, so the constitution, the South African constitution, let's say if I'm talking about South Africa, it does give provision that it is the first rule of the country that you are not supposed to it cannot be superseded by any other law, to ensure that whatever business you want to do that is related to food, it cannot be bigger than a human being's life. You see, no matter how much you want to make money. So that's why, to show that there are other people who are not compliant with this, that's why you see such small cases appear of food poisoning. Let's say, for example, if I'm referring to my study, in Botswana, there were foodborne illnesses that were recurring concern. I would say in Eswatini, foodborne illnesses that have been linked to poor hygiene and unregulated of handling food practices. In Lesotho as well, and in Malawi, where a cholera outbreak has been affected by people through food contamination. Mozambique 2015, over 75 people who died consuming a local beer. I think you remember that story where they said people went to a wedding, whatever, and then a lot of people died. Fine. And then in South Africa, we've been having a listeriosis that you know about, that one, where people will buy polony, and that polony you make as pato, and that pato you sell it to children at school, and so forth and so forth. You see. So, and then now we've been seeing the issues of spaza. In Zambia, we've seen the exacerbated by factors such as conflict in inadequate sanitation and climate change. Reports from 2024 that there was over 800,000 cholera cases and nearly 6,000 deaths. And in Zimbabwe, we experienced significant cholera outbreak in 2008 to 2009. So even the Comoros Islands, the Madagascar, and Mauritius and Seychelles and Tanzania. So even for Angola, you see, all these SADC countries, there are issues which are linked to a Batalifi situation. That there are other people who just want to bypass, and that comes to what? To the justice system. You see, there are other people who are sitting there. No, you can pass with this thing. Just give me 200 rand. That thing. Yes, you can take that 200 rand. Whoever is going to move through the border or sell that particular product to other people, it causes death and a lot of serious illnesses. So it's up to us as individuals. Sometimes, really, I know we all need money, but there are other decisions that we make that are related to food. This is a practical example, and it's a big problem. I really like what our colleague Batalifi is doing this study. You understand what I'm saying? So with this one, after everything that I've seen last year, so that's why I created this study, that public policing, public health, because we must, even we know we there are not many food inspectors, but in my study recommendation, I recommend that there's a lot of gadgets which are technological, which as a police official you can carry and go to the food market and do like this scanners. You saw this is rotten meat. You know, we have in South Africa, we've got Marabastad, if you don't know it. If you go to Marabastad, you know it's smelling. But people buy that meat. They don't care. They just go and buy it and say, yeah, it's nice, it's delicious. You see, yeah, I think that's what this is very emotional. What the other speaker just mentioned, he just nailed it and just put me there. And I can't believe. And when I did this study, I'm only meeting Batalifi today. I hope we need to talk. I need to know more. Thank you so much.
No, I'm glad this opened up networking opportunities, and with both of you here, I'm sure we can make so much difference. Batalifi, your field of study, as well as Dr. Mpidi as well, who knew that both these professions can cross in such a way. But before we close, because can you believe it? It has been an hour now. That just shows how interesting this is. And my colleague Bramaik has been saying that we must turn this thing into a master class, and I think that is very much needed. But I want us to talk about a very real danger that both of you touched on, that is also unfolding across many of our townships. Food poisoning, like you said, Dr. P.
Yeah.
I've seen videos this week circulating of fake or illegal produced beverages, mahwam that we used to eat in primary, and we never got sick. Even counterfeit Coca-Colas, now are on the rise. And a lot of this ends up in spaza shops, like you've mentioned also, where regulations are weak, no food inspectors, and our people, especially children, are the first victims. And then, some people argue that this is a result of poverty or survival hustles. Others are also linking it to technology being used irresponsibly. But the mass replication of food products and altered expiry dates also, and as well as chemically altered ingredients, they are all flooding informal markets. So then here's my question. Is this crisis about the abuse of food technology, or is it a weak governance and the neglect of township safety? And more importantly, what does justice look like in this space? Who's really held accountable, or is it anyone even watching? And maybe if you can give us you can do these grassroots food injustices that tie into your work on reclaiming food systems. Should food safety be elevated to a constitutional or legal right issue, Dr. Mpidi, especially when it's literally about protecting life under life in under resourced communities?
I mean, from the work that I do, I will say the issue of food poisoning in South Africa, especially you look at it, it's a class and almost a race issue because it happens in particular settings within our society, right? And by our society, I mean in the context of South Africa, because yes. So I think for one, in our collaborative mobilization as young people, it's important for us to say we have a local municipality. We always joke and say when services are supposed to be provided, they're not there. But when the ballot box has to locate you, it will locate you, right? It's important for you to say within my local municipal office, who is in charge of inspecting food? And I think that's a conversation we perhaps need to start in our collectivities as young people. And I'm saying this because we also want to avoid getting into a situation where, as we see with various movements, especially in the context of township spaces in South Africa, where you now also have almost like a mob approach to solving these issues. That will not get us anywhere. Unfortunately, we need to follow the legal route, and there's legal frameworks for that. And so I'll say this: your local municipality has to have a food inspector. There was an outbreak of a foot and mouth disease at a particular feed lot in Bloemfontein. They were quickly able to pick it up and close it before it spread into the neighboring communities and causing havoc. Those same mechanisms can be put in place. And I think at the governance level, some of these protocols are lax because there's a taking for granted of some sort that because it's a low socioeconomic community, agency is not a thing. But when you have a group of young people that say, who's supposed to inspect food in our district, we want to know who is in charge of that, and we would really like to have them sign a memorandum of understanding that claims that any particular outbreaks within the district, they have to be held liable. I think that's one way of us beginning to have these conversations.
Yes. So now, people, all of us, we really need to understand, let's say in a South African context, the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, it established an obligation to prevent food contamination and protect public health. And then we also have the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act of 1954 of 1972. We also have the National Health Act. And then we also have the police officials who are supposed to go and make sure that they intervene in cases where food contamination results into criminal, it becomes a crime. However, we want to prevent that. So what must happen? So what's been happening is that officials who work in government, who are supposed to be observing, who are supposed to making sure that everything is compliant here, most of them are taking bribes. So when you take a bribe, it means that whoever it is that is doing this is going to get away with it. You see, and then from there, as a result, when you've taken a bribe, and then people go and die, and then the police have to do what? It's another job. They have to go and say, oh, there was a murder here, this and this and this is happening. So it's like we're sabotaging ourselves. So it is very important for people to know that it is a constitutional right that no one must consume anything that is contaminated. And there are health officials who are appointed as food inspectors everywhere in South Africa. You need to do your job. And then so I wrote this study because I noticed that there is a shortage. So that's why I indicated that there must be a policing of public health and making sure that law enforcement, they do go and on food patrols or visible policing, and making sure that they go to this market to check food contamination and protecting their rights to health and food security within the markets. It's just an issue of non-compliance to the law, not following regulations, people not going out in local municipality to go and do their job. You understand what I'm saying? And most of them are those who get away with it. It's those people who bribe, and that's when the results is the diseases that we see here, and other people, other problems. People buy chemicals from everywhere. and we see it on social media. They just mix those things and everything. However, whoever is selling those things, they sell them not just on the street. They go to there's a spaza shop. Spaza shop has a license, and the license must be what? Monitored, and the food must be monitored by the inspector from the municipality. So you see where the problem is. It's cascading down, going upwards, and everything. People are not doing their job. When we'll keep on seeing these things, when people are not taking this seriously, and in other cases, others, they do get affected because maybe today my child or my relative's child died, and you work in a municipality, that spaza shop is non-compliant, and you keep quiet. Why? Because they are paying rent in your backyard. It's very painful.
It really is painful. And the bribe, a lot of people attribute it to our officials not getting enough pay. But I mean, I don't know. It is a much more deeper thing. But unfortunately, our time has run out. But this was this is an incredible, rich and thought-provoking conversation. From food justice to systematic reforms, culture to corruption. It's clear that this is not a conversation that ends here.
No.
I think, like my colleague has said, we need we need to call it justice. That deserves a 2.5 or maybe or 3.0. With more time, more stories, and even more youth voices at the table. But to everyone that tuned in, don't stop here. Join us again on Monday, June 16, for our Youth Day program, where we'll be continuing to reclaim Africa's future, unapologetically so, and creatively and collectively. A massive thank you to Dr. Mpidi and Batlalifi, for
Thank you.
bringing
Thank you.
energy and the truth in it. This you really made this space so hot. And to the Youth Evolve team, the beating heart behind young African futuristic. Thank you for the work behind the scenes and on the ground. And to everyone watching, you're part of this shift. Let's keep building, keep questioning, and let's keep pushing for the Africa we deserve. Thank you, and see you on Monday.
Thank you.